Every good problem seems really hard to tackle at first. But when you break it down into its subsidiary parts, it's often a lot easier than you think it is to solve.
How do you navigate change? It's a question we think about often, and one that today's world expects us to be comfortable with. The challenge, however, is where do you begin, and how do you develop the mindset and skill set to be successful? Welcome, everyone, to the Sprint to Success with Design Thinking podcast. I'm your host, Saba Kidwai. Join me each week as I share the stories and strategies from the world's leading researchers and practitioners about why they believe the answer lies in practicing design thinking. Over the past few weeks, I've been inspired by the initiative that Jerry L. Mendez, the superintendent at Santa Ana Unified School District, has taken to hear from students about what changes they want to see moving forward in schools. He's been asking students 3 specific questions. Number 1, what challenges are you having with distance learning? Number 2, if you had a magic wand and could change anything about your learning experience, what would you change? And number 3, what advice would you give yourself a year ago? Clubhouse has been an eye-opening space for hearing more student voices, hearing their challenges, their goals, their dreams, and most fascinating of all, the gaps they see in their education experience and what they'd like to see moving forward. In an effort to amplify more student voices and more stories, I'm going to be bringing more of them here on the podcast. After all, they are the ones who we are designing for. From their articulation of challenges, along with their motivation and initiative to design solutions, every conversation leaves me wondering, how have they not been included in the change process sooner? I hope this episode inspires you to seek out more young voices in your community and engage with them as co-designers as together we reinvent education. I first came across today's guest, Luke Harris, a high school sophomore at Horace MannSchool in New York City, through an article that he wrote for Fast Company. It was called, "I'm a high school sophomore. Here's how schools can teach kids to solve real-world problems." Naturally, I knew I had to learn more. I begin by asking Luke to introduce himself and tell us what learning during the pandemic has been like.
My name is Luke Harris. I'm a sophomore at Horace MannSchool here in New York City. And for about the past year, I've been working on a curriculum designed to teach students how to find and solve problems using the entrepreneurial design process. At least for me, especially during the era of Zoom, I've noticed that a lot of my classes have been switching less from tests and homework and more to long-term projects. My history class this year has been entirely comprised of research, long-term projects. We haven't done any in-class essays or tests or fact memorization.
Wow, was it like that before?
For middle school and elementary school, it was a lot of what happened and when, but especially as I've moved into high school, it's been more about understanding the elements of any given situation and breaking it down and giving a perspective on it.
As someone who enjoys taking things apart and not quite getting them back together and building computers, Luke loved the making aspect of what he was learning in his engineering course. I asked Luke to share more about this engineering course experience and the gap that existed in how he felt he was being prepared.
Last year, I took Intro to Engineering, and it started off with, I don't know if you're familiar with orthographic drawings, but ortho means like straight, like 90 degrees, as in like kind of dentist. And orthographic drawing is when you take an object and you look at it from all the 90-degree angles, the top, front, and side. In essence, it's a blueprint. It's just a fancy way of saying it. So we started off with learning to just draw blueprints of like squares or like stairs or something, a very simple geometric objects. Then we moved into drawing blueprints of things like cans, computer monitors, water bottles, more complex shapes. And then finally, we learned how to turn our ideas into blueprints on paper. And this all culminated in the second semester where we'd come up with an idea and then we'd blueprint it and then we'd make it in a shop. So we'd go in, we'd lathe out all the circular parts and then we'd bandsaw the square parts, etc.
Very interesting. And so, as you were going through that experience, you said that there were some gaps that you identified that you felt like you just quite like you wish something had been part of the curriculum that wasn't. Tell us a little bit about how you stumbled across that. Like, how did you begin thinking about what was missing and what was missing for you in that process?
Yeah, so about a year and 3 months ago, I visited a biotech lab. And while I was there, they were working on a glove to help stroke victims gain control over their muscles. And there were two prototypes that they showed me. One which used pneumatics, so air pressure, in order to push air through tubes, and then the tube would expand and close the muscle. And then if you took the air out, the hand would expand. And the second one used electric muscles. So when a current was pushed through them, they would contract and expand in the same sort of way. But what that showed me, the insight that I got from that was that it started off with the problem. How can we make a glove which helps victims of stroke regain control of their hand? And then it looked at the materials and the solution. It was a pneumatics or electric muscles. They didn't create a new type of electric muscle and say, well, what can we do with this? They started with the problem and then came up with the solution. So when I sort of realized that, I came up with what I like to call the 3 steps of finding and solving a problem, which is finding the problem, solving the problem, and turning it into a prototype. My engineering class taught me how once I have an idea, a solution to a problem, I can turn it into a prototype. But it didn't teach me how to solve problems or even how to find a good problem to solve. So that was the main gap that I found.
Luke's observation speaks to one of the quintessential challenges we see in the student entrepreneurship and project-based learning space. It's this lack of emphasis on developing the skills to ask questions, having that empathy lens, identifying gaps that can become opportunities for design. His reflection, my class didn't teach me how to solve problems or how to even find a good problem to solve, is one of the reasons that design thinking is unique compared to other frameworks. Design thinking begins with empathy, challenging us to set our solutions aside, to begin observing, asking questions, identifying needs, and speaking to the very people who we're designing for. Luke isn't alone in emphasizing the importance of asking questions and examining, are we solving the right problem? In Clubhouse, when you hear from students who have started businesses or who are young entrepreneurs, one of the things they emphasize time and time again is how they wish they had had more of an educational experience, allowing them to develop the question asking and the problem finding skill set. These students aren't alone. Albert Einstein once said, "If I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on the solution, I would spend the first 55 minutes determining the proper question to ask. For once I know the proper question, I could solve the problem in less than 5 minutes." I asked Luke to share how he found himself in a biotech lab that led to his discovery and what the entrepreneur in him led him to create.
My mom has been working with the lab. She knows somebody who's part of the lab, and they offered to give her a tour, and she knew that I was interested in engineering, so she offered to let me come along. My curriculum starts off with asking students to conduct ethnographic research, which comes from the field of anthropology, where you observe like a population and see what they do. But the thing that I'm trying to ask students to do is look at people, like at a Starbucks or a McDonald's, and watch what problems they have. So if you go to McDonald's and you see somebody is having trouble getting the bottles that they sell into the trash can because the circle is too small, then that's a problem you can identify. So it asks students to both observe and also interview. So they go up to people and they say, what problems did you have today? What would you want changed, etc. And the second part of that is learning to take those problems and break them down, because every problem seems really, at least in my experience, every good problem seems really hard to tackle at first. But when you break it down into its subsidiary parts, it's often a lot easier than you think it is to solve. And then once you have a solution, I ask students to return to the first step and ask people, do you think this solution is a good one? And what should I change about it? And then finally turn it into a prototype, which they can then present to their class.
That's so fantastic. And one of the things that I really like about what you did is I was looking through it, like you even adjust the questions
sort of based on like the age level of like the different students. Tell me why that was important to you.
Well, I think of problems as almost like a tree, right? So if I look at a very simple problem, like my favorite example for young students is there's a cookie on the high shelf and I'm a child. How do I get the cookie off the high shelf? It's easy to look at that and just say, well, get a ladder or call a parent. And that's uh, good, but it doesn't give you a creative solution. But if you think about it and you say, well, what are the methods that I can use to get the cookie? Well, I can go to the cookie or the cookie can come to me, right? There's already two branches to that. And within every solution, they're going to fit into one of those two categories, either going to the cookie or the cookie can come to me, or just not getting the cookie, I guess. But that sort of circumvents the whole issue. So when you scale that up to a more complex problem, like the problem that I propose for older students, which is how can you get a biker to go 1 mile further? There's a lot of things that you can change about that. You can make the bike, you can change the way the biker moves, you can change the trail he goes on, you can change the bike itself, you can change the environment he's in. So it's a lot of different categories of problem, but they all are focused on this one larger hood. And when you look at that overarching problem, it sort of divides itself up nicely.
While many of us are able to notice and voice challenges, we don't all have the skill set to know what we can do about those challenges. Design thinking empowers us to say, how might we? Implying that we have options for how to do something about our challenge. What I love about Luke's curriculum is how he adjusts the language for different age levels. His articulation of the gap he identified and his initiative in designing a solution is a reminder to me, and I hope to anyone listening, the valuable role young people today can play as co-designers in what we're doing. I asked Luke to share why he believes so deeply in problem finding and to share his motivation behind designing this resource for other students to use.
I think that schools today don't teach students how to face problems that we don't know about. We're in an age where AI and many new technologies are rapidly changing the landscape of problems that we have to face. And an increasingly changing society, there's going to be increasingly changing problems. We don't know what the major political or world problems our population is going to be facing in 20 years from now. So we can't create lessons which tell students, here's how to solve every waste management problem in the history of ever, because that's impossible. There's an infinite amount. So we need to teach students methods which let them solve any problem that they come across by breaking it down. And that's what I hope to accomplish.
A few weeks ago, we had Eric Brynjolfsson, author of The Second Machine Age, on the show to share this.
We have the potential to have the next 10 years be the best 10 years in human history, but it's not at all automatic. We have tools that are more powerful than any tools we've ever had before. And by definition, a tool allows you to change things. You can use it to amplify your skills and to do new things, but they aren't automatically used to make things better. It depends on what our choices are. So a really important message is not to look at AI as necessarily bad, that it's going to do terrible things, or AI necessarily good. That's equally mistaken. We have to look at AI as something that amplifies our values. And that puts a lot more weight on us thinking carefully about what we want these tools to do. We can, if we want to, use these tools to create more broadly shared prosperity, and education, something you've been working on, is a big part of that. But I don't want people to get complacent and think that we're doomed or that everything's going to work out okay.
In speaking to Luke, I'm reminded of what Eric shared. We do, as humans, enjoy these things. We all have ideas, yet we don't always know how to take action on those ideas. I asked Luke where he believes he gained the creative confidence, this ability to turn ideas into action from.
When I was younger, I did a lot of projects like this with my grandfather and my father. It's not as wide scale. It's things like, how can I make like a fun new kind of like toy car or something like that. And my favorite example of this was, I don't know if you're familiar with the YouTuber Mark Rober.
I'm not. Tell me.
So Mark Rober, he was a retired NASA engineer, and now he's a very popular YouTuber. And once a month, he puts out a new project he's been working on. That's how it's that's sort of his style. But one of his older videos is something called the gorilla camera, where he took a mirror, drilled a hole into it, and put a phone camera in that hole. And then you go to the gorilla exhibit at the zoo, put it up, and then all the gorillas would come up and want to see themselves in their reflection. And it gave them really great photos. So I did a ton of projects like that when I was younger. And I think that sort of gave me the confidence to say, well, if I want to do something cool, like if a retired NASA engineer is spending his time making cameras to get funny photos of gorillas, there's no reason for me not to just do something because it sounds fun. There's no reason for me not to just try something. So I thought I'd just try my hand at making an engineering curriculum.
What was your experience like designing a curriculum? Is it something you had done before? Were there challenges? Were there things that surprised you about doing something like that?
In the past, I worked as an assistant teacher at a robotics after school program. So I was somewhat familiar with how students were taught robotics, which is sort of a subsidiary of engineering. But I'd never really designed a curriculum. And a lot of the resources online mostly just said, there are special people who will do that. So if you want to become a teacher, don't worry. So what I decided to do was I looked, so in New York City, there's a lot of colleges, and they offer a variety of courses. And even outside of college, there's basically a course for anything you could ever want to do. There's somebody teaching you. So I looked around my city and I found that there was a college course which offered something similar to this, more focused on building a business out of a solution. So it's finding a problem, solving it, and building a business. But I asked the professor if I could audit the class and just take notes on how he taught and what the process was. So once I had that, I've always been, I don't know if the word is adept, but I've always been adept at copying people, I want to say. It's like I can do imitations pretty well. So once I saw what a good entrepreneurship curriculum looked like, I can take the elements of it, reformat them and change them into something which I thought was better suited for middle schoolers and high schoolers.
From creative confidence to seeking out resources, Luke's belief in himself that he is a creator is one that we often lose sight of as we get older. Yet as Duncan Wardle, the former vice president of innovation and creativity at Disney, reminds us, we were all born creative. Another fascinating part of Luke's article was the differentiation between creating something for yourself and creating something for others. I asked Luke to share more about why he believes differentiation is important to understand as a creator.
Well, I think that, at least in my case, whenever I create something for myself, like when I take notes or whenever I create a project, or whenever I even code something, I notice that I use a lot of shorthand and I create shortcuts because, like, I know what random gibberish that I put on the page or a random variable that I choose, I know what that means. But when I create something for someone else, I always notice that I try and be more organized because I realize if somebody else has to look at this, they need to be able to see my thought process clearly and be able to replicate it almost. If they look at my code, if they look at a variable, they need to say, well, this variable accomplishes this purpose. So if I want to modify it, I need to be able to change the variable. It's sort of like when you're designing something to last long term, you need to make sure that even if you aren't there actively making sure that it's working, somebody else can do that for you.
We've heard from Luke about why he believes problem solving is an essential skill. I asked him, is it something that everyone can learn?
I think that any kid can learn how to problem solve because I think that there's a framework for both finding and solving problems. Finding problems just requires patience. It requires you to just look, watch, observe, write notes. They don't need to be good notes. They just need to be a list of 5-10 problems. They need to just be research, looking at online forums. What are other people saying? It's not that you need some deep insight. It's that you just need to watch and be patient. And when solving problems, it's not about having, again, some sort of deep insight. It's not about saying, I have the first genius solution to this problem. It's getting all of your ideas on paper. It's saying, this is an awful idea, and I know it's an awful idea, but I'm going to put it on the page because it could be a good idea. I don't think it is, but what do I know?
Do you feel like when you are working with your peers, collaborating on projects, are those things that you see kind of amongst everyone?
I think that whenever I've been collaborating on projects, I noticed, especially when it comes to schoolwork with other kids in my class, teenagers, at least like my age, have a really deep insecurities about like working with other people. And I've noticed this in myself. I don't want to say something and then sound really stupid, because who wants to sound stupid in front of the people that they spend most of their day with? But I think that there needs to be a change in culture, especially around brainstorming, when it comes to just learning to put all of your ideas on the page.
Luke shines a light on the importance of changing the culture around how we generate and share ideas. This is another reason why introducing the design thinking process early on can be advantageous. Design thinking isn't only about having a framework for problem finding and problem solving, it also helps us enhance and develop the mindsets we need to thrive in a rapidly changing world, such as brainstorming and ideation. Design thinking helps us not only become more empathetic, but it allows us to reframe failure as experiments, this understanding that our first try isn't our last try. Guy Kawasaki probably says it best when he says when thinking about new ideas, he says, don't worry, be crappy, because if we spend all our time trying to create the perfect idea, we'll likely have no ideas. While doing interviews with the educators at Design 39, they shared, when we put an idea on the table, it's no longer my idea, it's our idea. And when we all put our ideas on the table together, we come together to make something great. I asked Luke what steps he'd like to see people take in creating a more safe culture so that collaboration can thrive, and what he hopes students take away from his curriculum.
Well, at least I've noticed that the thing that always drives kids to come up with crazy ideas is pushing them in terms of quantity. If you ask kids to come up with 20 new innovations related to bagels, I can only off the top of my head come up with like 2. But when you push kids to really get to that number 20, get to that number 30, get to 15, it really makes them stretch their imagination. Any idea that they can come up with, especially because who wants to do an activity where you have to put 20 ideas about a bagel on paper? You just want to get it done, which means that it becomes less about not looking stupid and more about just getting all of those ideas on paper and then just being done with it. So it accomplishes the goal of doing good brainstorming in a way that doesn't actually like, it's like tricking the kid to get them to come up with good ideas.
That's so interesting, because you're right. It does. Like, and that is a muscle, right? The creativity, the curiosity, all of those things are definitely muscles that challenge a lot of things, I think, that we're taught how things should be done. I'm curious, what are some, if you had to say like the top 3 things you hope for somebody, for a student to take away from your curriculum, what would that be?
I think the first thing that any student can take away from my curriculum is that any problem that you're faced with can always be broken down. If you're given a problem of like, how do I get to class faster? You can always come up with multiple routes. You can always come up with a better way. There's always something else you can do. I think the second thing that any student can take away from my curriculum is that just because there's an idea which is bad, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have merit. Just because it's an idea which could never feasibly work does not mean that you should throw it out. It's always a good idea to look at a solution and think about what you can even take out of it. And I think the third thing, which is comes out of my curriculum, but it's more about the way, at least that I brought out of it, that when I was writing my curriculum, and I think this is a lesson that I'd want to pass on to students, is when teachers write lessons, when they create activities, they're trying to get you to learn something. An example which I like to use is I had a Spanish class where my teacher asked me to make a comic book as like a assessment. But my Spanish teacher is a Spanish teacher. She's not the art teacher. She doesn't care how good my comic book is. She wanted to give me a creative medium to learn the verb tenses and to learn the vocabulary. But if I had taken that at face value and put all of my time to making a good comic book with a great story and just forgotten about the verbs, then that wouldn't have ended up very well. So I think students need to remember that teachers are always trying to teach them something through every activity, and learning what that is can help them enjoy the activity more and also do better.
Quantity is greater than quality. It's one of the core ideas of the third phase of the design thinking process called ideation. We often come to the table with solutions in mind and learning to play in the problem space, entering with that beginner's mind, leaving behind what you know, where you begin with this idea of imagine if is a muscle that we have to continuously tone. Since many of the ideas Luke shares aren't traditionally taught in school, I ask him, where does he learn from?
I would say that I learned best, at least when I was younger, and I think still now, is by taking things apart and learning to put them back. It's like, if you look at my room, it's a total mess of like broken apart toys and electronics and gadgets that I've gotten. I've got on my workbench, I've got a rotary telephone that I broke apart and I'm trying to piece it back together. It's because when I learn about how something is broken and then I learn to put it back together, I learn how each part interacts with all the other parts in the system.
Do you have some of like favorite authors or favorite like mediums, like books, magazines, podcasts, social media? Like what are some of the ways in which you kind of like, who do you learn from? What are some of the ways in which you learn in that way?
I think that my favorite medium of learning something is like YouTube video essays and video documentaries. I end up watching a lot of them, even about topics that I would normally never come across. But I think my favorite book, which I've read, at least recently, was called Head in the Cloud. And it sort of talks about problem solving and how people learn today. It's like 30% of Americans thought early humans rode dinosaurs. It's just like surprising facts that you'd think people would know, but in the age of the internet, how much ignorance there is.
Luke shares with us age-old advice that many others on the podcast have shared as well. We learn best by doing, and of course, through YouTube University. Luke highlights a key concern for many today: ignorance in the age of the internet. You'll recall from an earlier podcast episode where I shared a study done by the Stanford History Education Group that found that high school students are unprepared to judge the credibility of information on the internet. From assessing the trustworthiness of sources, to differentiating between news and sponsored content, to evaluating sources during a search, the authors describe the results as dismal, bleak, and a threat to democracy. I shared this study and the results with Luke and asked him to share his thoughts and strategies for helping overcome ignorance in the age of the internet.
Well, at least in my experience in writing things like history papers or science papers, I don't really struggle with or combat fake news often because there's very few people who are spreading fake news about like the biology of like a chameleon, because that's such an odd thing to spread fake news about. But I think in the world right now, we have a lot of fake news around extremely politicized issues. So what I would encourage people to do when doing research, when trying to find something out, like learn a fact, is you have to sort of think logically about what's happening. If there's something that somebody's saying, listen to their argument, listen to the outcome, and try and think about it from their perspective, but also do that for multiple sources. Because the first step, I think, to assessing the trustworthiness of a news source is sort of thinking about it from their side. Think about, why are they publishing this piece? What are they gaining? Are they doing it because they think that there's some social change that they're bringing about? Are they doing it for money? Do they care whether it's true or not? And once you have that, assess that from multiple news sites, cross-reference them, and I think you'll end up with more trustworthy news than untrustworthy news.
I asked Luke if he had a message for leaders across industries who are thinking about reinventing education moving forward to better meet the needs of students. What advice would he share?
I think my overall message is that a lot of school is about structured learning. It's, what are the facts? How can I teach the kids the facts and make sure that they know the facts? But I think that there's room for messy learning, which is like unstructured at first, but it gives a greater sense of the overall context. When you ask kids to figure stuff out for themselves, when you ask them to look at a larger issue and come up with their own ideas, assess its value almost themselves, they learn to understand both the parts of it and its overall meaning within the world. If you ask a student to assess the significance of a battle in history or a war that was fought or a political decision, then they not only learn about what that actually was, but also what it meant in relation to everything else they've studied. And I think that's what my curriculum tries to do. It asks students to look at the parts, learn the greater context.
Luke's call to action for education leaders: let students engage in messy learning. And since he's shared so many interesting insights, I asked Luke, what advice would he share with his peers who are currently in school?
I think students need to remember that every single thing, almost every single thing in the world, is a solution to a problem. The bucket that's under the ceiling is a solution to the water that's dripping down. And when you think of everything as a solution to a problem, it allows you to have greater empathy for people in the world and understand their perspectives and viewpoints.
Luke's call to action for students: start with empathy. Over the years, if there's one lesson I've been humbled by time and time again, it's that when we begin with empathy, what we think is challenged by what we learn. Luke isn't the only student who calls for this. Each Wednesday at 2:30 Pacific Time, Michael Cohen, better known as the Tech Rabbi, and I host a room in Clubhouse titled "What Does Gen Z Need to Succeed?" The answer we hear most is that they want to develop empathy and problem-finding skills. Today's learners are empowered by the tools they have to be creators, and they want to become better at asking the right questions so that they can identify the right problems to create solutions for. I thank Luke for taking time out of his weekend to have this conversation with me and to share with us what his future plans are and what problems he's excited to work on and what his thoughts are on whether or not he's going to go to college as a young entrepreneur.
Well, right now, I'm trying to get this curriculum rolled out. I've been talking to schools across the country about getting it into their classrooms, and I'm trying to get it in front of as many kids as possible, whether that's through after-school programs, doing it with a parent and a student one-on-one over the summer, or in an actual learning environment. But other than that, I've been working as an intern at a game development company, which has been super exciting, and I've been having a lot of fun with it. Well, I think college is a great place to expand your mind, your view, your worldview. And I think if anyone wants to be an entrepreneur, the first thing that they need is a relatively realistic worldview. It's hard to solve the world's problems if you live in an idealistic world. And talking to people, getting their perspective, having your opinions and views challenged in a place like college, I think is a great opportunity. And I'm hoping to go to college and study engineering. So I'm excited for that. The only thing that I'd like to share is that if anyone would like to use the curriculum or needs anything from me, you can always contact me and ask me for additional resources, additional advice, anything like that.
So, okay, so let me ask you this. When, say, a school is interested, do you do like an onboarding with them? Do you do a bit of an overview about how they might be able to use it? What does that process look like for somebody who is interested?
So usually I try and get an understanding of what their school looks like and where they're trying to use the curriculum, whether that's through an after-school program or through like a specific engineering program. From there, I try and teach them how the curriculum works, where it's about letting students guide themselves through the experience and aiding them with additional resources that they can use and answering their questions. And that's what I try and do. There's not really, I can't fly across the country, so I can't be there, but I try and stay updated and I try and hear about what they're doing with my curriculum.
That's fantastic. Do you have a story you want to share around somebody that used it?
The local after-school program, they used it with a bunch of elementary schoolers. And first of all, a lot of the solutions were really cute, like the student who decided to get the cookie off the shelf, like cutting it down with a chainsaw. But it was really awesome to see how they got through the problems, and the way that they structured it was because it's during a pandemic and because not everyone who's working online has access to the same resources. They used red Solo cups and pieced them together to make their prototypes. So that was super cool to see how really creative kids could get with like paper cups and red Solo cups. And like they had a really elaborate like projects where it was like 3 red Solo cups and they were like, yeah, this is the deconstructor, which would destroy the cookie jar and teleport it right into my mouth. And I was like, that's so cool. They're seeing so much in like little cups.
Do you see a difference between how elementary school students view problem solving versus students who are older?
Yeah, I think that as students get older and more mature, they also sort of lose that brainstorming, like free flowing process. It's about realistic solutions because they've sort of realized the expectation is that when they say something, it makes sense. But when you're young, you don't have a framework for common sense. It's just sort of say what sounds cool. So when you ask young people to name every crazy solution, they quite literally name every crazy solution.
That's fantastic. So I'm really excited to be able to help you share this, get this out there, and hear more stories about the different crazy solutions that kids are coming up with. Luke, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to chat with you.
All right. Thank you for having me on.
I hope this conversation with a student has been a refreshing perspective on design and how we can begin thinking about the changes we want to see in the world today. I'll leave you with the same 3 questions that I opened with in hopes that you might want to have this conversation with your students as well. Number 1, what challenges are you having with distance learning? Number 2, if you had a magic wand and could change anything about your learning experience, what would you change? And number 3, what advice would you give yourself a year ago? I'm incredibly grateful to Jerry L. Menderes for sharing these questions and what he's doing at Santa Ana Unified with us. If you're interested in learning more, I'll link everyone today in the show notes. Until then, have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time. It's your turn to join the conversation by sharing what you enjoyed or what questions you still have. In a world where time and attention are so valuable, thank you for choosing to listen and for being a part of our Sprint to Success with Design Thinking community.